Okay, well, that's 10:02, and I think this is a short session, so we will get going and hope, um, well, maybe we hope, maybe we don't. There's more time for you to ask questions if we don't aren't flooded with many others. So, as I said earlier, my name is Steve Kenzie. I'm the Executive Director of the UN Global Compact Network UK. For those of you not familiar with the UN Global Compact, it's the UN's corporate sustainability initiative. It's the largest corporate sustainability initiative in the world. Our initiative is based on 10 universal principles that have been drawn out from UN treaties in the areas of human rights, labor standards, environment, and anti-corruption. So it's a truly universal agenda. We have local networks in 69 countries around the world, and this is brought to you by the UK network. The rationale for this session is that in most smaller companies' sustainability departments, if you can even call it a department, the individual who's leading on sustainability for the company is of necessity a generalist who has to look after climate change, but also perhaps diversity and inclusion and waste and water and all manner of issues that fall under that big umbrella that is sustainability. But in this time that we find ourselves, I think it's a near certainty that the biggest issue that the person leading on sustainability has to deal with is climate change. And so the rationale behind these Q&A sessions for us is to allow those of you that are sustainability generalists to have access to people that are specialists in climate change, so that you can pose questions that are challenging you, and we can help you to improve the performance of your company when it comes to climate change. So it's a pretty simple concept. And so here we are. And we're joined today by two experts. And our focus was on SMEs because it's a given, I think, and we'll come to this more hearing from our guests. SMEs represent the majority of our economy in just about every aspect. The most people employed, the most number of business taken in aggregate, the biggest impacts. But at the same time, possibly the most difficult sector, if we can even call it a sector, the most difficult constituency to access because of resource constraints, both on the side of the small business, but also on those that are trying to support small business. And it is a challenge for us to deliver services to smaller companies because the economics are challenging. So we recognize the importance of it and really delighted that you're able to join us today. It's going to be an informal session. Now, first, mostly conversational, but we really invite your questions, and you can either, and I think probably prefer, you type them into the chat. But if our numbers stay this small, then I think we may well be able to turn on video and you can pose your questions by raising your hand in the participant list, and I'll call upon you to pose your question. Our guests, we are joined today by Catherine Westoby from Bays and Liam Burlinson from Centrica, and I'm going to leave it to you both to give a more fulsome introduction. And so without further ado, Catherine, would you introduce yourself, and then we'll pass on to Liam, and then we'll get stuck into some questions.
Thank you, and thanks for inviting me today. This session is hugely important and incredibly, important for my work. So I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak. So my name is Catherine Westoby. I work for Bays. I'm a senior policy advisor in our new behaviour change team. So we're a small team looking at behaviour change that we need to see in order to meet our net zero by 2050 target. My focus is on business engagement for net zero, so understanding how we can best engage businesses to help them achieve net zero. And in the short term, especially ahead of COP26, while my colleagues working on that particular event are very focused on large multinationals, large corporates, very big emitters. I felt that there was a need to really look at how we can best engage SMEs in that space, because as you've already mentioned, SMEs are 99% of the UK business community. That's an enormous proportion. I mean, when we talk about business in the UK, we might as well be talking about SMEs, because they comprise such a huge majority of that sector. So again, it's really important that we engage with SMEs and understand the barriers and challenges that they face. To that end, I've set up an SME working group. So we've held 2 sessions to date. And again, the purpose of the group is to really dig deep, really understand what those barriers and challenges are for SMEs in the UK, and then look at how we can help mitigate them.
Thanks very much, Catherine. And Liam, tell us about yourself and Centrica also.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. My name is Liam Burlinson, and yeah, again, thank you for the invite to today. This is a topic that's very close to my heart, and I think it's great to see so many businesses wanting to kind of engage with this topic, because I think it's clearly something that's going to grow and not kind of disappear, despite obviously the situation we find ourselves in this year. So I work at Centrica, in part of the business that focuses on the B2B energy and services market. For those of you who don't know Centrica, so Centrica's a large energy and services business. We've got presence in the UK and in the United States. I think most of you will probably know us better in terms of having the brand of British Gas. So obviously a large kind of domestic energy and services business. But on the business side, we supply energy and services to around 300,000 UK businesses, predominantly SMEs. And my particular role, so I head up our business energy efficiency team. And we're a relatively new team. We were sort of formed formally at the beginning of this year. And I guess our specific task and challenge is kind of, I guess, exactly what today is about, which is how do we start to stimulate kind of better engagement and kind of understanding of how to take steps around net zero and climate change for the SME market, which I think historically we see as something which has probably been underserved in terms of insight and investment and kind of sort of just opportunities to try and sort of move on that path to net zero. So my role is trying to work that kind of pretty tricky question out with my team, and looking at what new solutions and services Centrica can provide to help businesses on the road towards net zero.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So let's get started. We have we've got about 35 minutes left, and I do really strongly encourage our audience to think about questions and post them in the chat, so that you're not just leaving it all down to me. Let's come back to that original question, and maybe we've sort of hinted at the answer, but why do you think it's so important that SMEs take action? Is there more to say about the need to crack this and the challenge itself? Catherine, would you like to?
Yeah, no, happy to jump in. I mean, there are really 2 parts to that question. So why is engaging SMEs on net zero important for government? As again, we've already mentioned, you know, SMEs are 99% of the UK business community. And obviously emissions in general, so looking at UK territorial emissions, 25% comes from business and industry, and of that, you know, over half of that are from SMEs. So again, it's really, really important that we look at SMEs and reduce their emissions. It's not just about the big emitters, it's about the role that those SMEs play in the bigger picture of UK territorial emissions in particular. And in terms of, I think it's important to look at why SMEs should decarbonise for their own reason, you know, for their own good, for their own sort of, you know, business purposes. So, you know, what we want to do is make the case that reducing emissions is good for business, you know, is good for your business. It's something that, you know, would be a very sensible move. We really want to make that key point, you know, that net zero is all about making savings. So, you know, reducing your emissions, reducing waste, and saving money that way. It's about growing your market share, sending the right signals to investors, to customers, and to employees as well. It's about making your business more resilient to environmental risks. So net zero is about protecting your business in that sense. And ultimately, it's about getting ahead of the curve. You know, we want SMEs to take advantage of new technologies, new green tech, again, which will save them money by reducing their emissions. And we also want to make it clear that, you know, being part of the net zero agenda is really about being part of a community. It's about finding like-minded SMEs and joining up with them to look at new innovative solutions to reducing emissions. So I think as part of that package, you know, we really want to make it clear that it's not just about what, you know, government wants from SMEs, it's about, you know, the benefits of net zero for SMEs themselves.
Thank you. Liam, anything to add? I'm interested also, I suppose, in what's the driver for Centrica? It seems like a counterintuitive to your business case to be encouraging clients to use less energy.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's a great answer from Catherine, and I think that, I mean, there's so many different sort of facts and statistics around the contribution of SMEs towards carbon change. I think for us as a business, I mean, clearly as an energy and services provider, we have relied heavily on kind of gas consumption, electricity consumption for a long time. But I think for us to thrive as a business and to survive into the future, this is clearly something that Centrica needs to support. And I think given the nature of our business and our scale and reach, it's something that we're really keen to be very much at the forefront of. So kind of naturally our core business, if you look at kind of our services business, we are traditionally a field-based force in our services business who install and service gas boilers. And clearly as kind of the UK moves towards different low carbon heating solutions, we need to pivot with that and react to the fact that the market's going to change. I think just to add to what Catherine said, I think it's nice to sit here and say I think it's the right thing to do, but I think a lot of the SMEs that we talk to, it's about that kind of investment and that payback. So I think we are actually now beginning to reach a real tipping point where financially taking action is a lot more compelling for businesses. So we're starting to see kind of the continued acceleration of electric vehicles. You're seeing a lot of companies beginning to shift their fleets towards EVs. We're seeing a lot of more kind of green tariffs, green energy tariffs within the market as well. And you're also starting to see some quite new technology enter the market at kind of quite good cost, whether that be kind of really efficient hybrid boilers, whether that be other alternatives. I think the main thing is that some of the technologies that potentially cost was a prohibitive factor for businesses in the past, that's becoming something which probably isn't as much of a barrier anymore. And I think, as Catherine says, there's going to be new interventions. There will be new regulations that kind of come in around this space to help us achieve net zero. So I think engaging SMEs now in that rather than leaving them to last is going to be really key to achieving the 2050 target.
Thank you. I think I'd be interested in going further into that. I think that's these innovative solutions that you referenced, Catherine, and Liam, you mentioned some. It just, I guess, just that whole where do you recommend a small business start? I mean, that's one of the challenges, isn't it? We out of convenience we lump small business together, but the difference between a company with 10 employees and one with 249 is quite different. And of course, we also cut across so many different sectors from small shops to small manufacturers. So out of necessity, we're going to do a lot of generalizing here. But is there a favorite new innovation that you could point to, or something that you're really excited about that seems to be coming in?
Yeah, I'll sort of field that one. So I suppose that I should really sit here and kind of promote a particular piece of technology that Centrica is looking at, I guess. But I think one thing that we're finding with small businesses when we talk to them, and one thing that's really kind of central to our strategy here, is that exactly as you said, Steve, that no one business is necessarily the same as the next one. So it's an obvious example, but if you take a high street hairdresser, they're not necessarily going to need the same solutions as a small manufacturing business. And then equally, every manufacturing business is potentially going to be different and have different needs. So I think what we're really looking at is how do we start to kind of differentiate those different sectors? And I think one of the very, very first things that's really, really important is focusing on that specific customer's needs and the specific solutions that are right for their business. I think a lot of that starts with the insight that we can provide to the business in the first place. So I think one of the first actions, one of the things that we've been talking to BEIS and the government about quite actively is, how do you really engage the market to actually understand the role that energy plays in their business? How do you provide them with new tools, innovative platforms to be able to break down and understand where energy is being used, where energy is being wasted, and then start to harness some of the kind of the other data sources that we can get on those businesses, whether it be smart metering data, whether it be building energy efficiency data, to start providing more kind of targeted insights around the types of technologies that would be right for that business. So I don't think it's necessarily about saying there is kind of a one-size-fits-all answer for SMEs where a certain package of technologies would be right. I think it's very much about starting with that pre-engagement and making sure that we tailor the solutions that a business needs by actually kind of getting through the door, talking to them about their energy usage, and using some of the kind of the capabilities around insight and data to actually give them something that feels kind of tailored and specific to their business rather than generic.
So almost the first step is a smart meter to start to get that proper understanding of where the energy is going.
Yeah, I think smart's a really important enabler, because it's access to a deeper level of data and insight around energy that we as energy suppliers and the market hasn't had before.
Catherine, would you add anything?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, just to completely agree. Obviously, what Liam was saying. I mean, that's obviously crucial. We need, SMEs to understand that there's technology out there that can help them understand their energy use, and what you can measure, you can manage. And I think that's obviously really important. But I just want to sort of skip back a step, because you were mentioning, the investment in new technologies that might be, make it easier for SMEs to meet net zero. And what I suppose I'm really cautious of is, in the current economic climate, that we unavoidable at the minute, that lots of businesses are suffering. And I want to make it clear to them when we engage with them that this is about finding an economical, quick and easy solution to reach net zero, that it's not about spending loads of money up front. It's not about that massive capital investment that they might think they need in order to, adopt this new green technology that's going to help them achieve net zero. I don't want to start from that premise. I want to start from, how can we help save you money in the short term? How can we sort of, look at these really quick and easy first steps that will start you on that journey, that will start you moving towards net zero? It might not be achievable right now, but how can we help you understand those really simple first steps that we want you to take? And again, those probably do relate to energy efficiency. It's probably about looking at your light bulbs, looking at insulating your building, because obviously we know a lot of emissions come from heat in buildings. So it's about, I think that conversation for me really is about understanding, listening to businesses and understanding what those quick first steps could be, because we know that energy efficiency saves us money, and yet lots of us don't take it up. Lots of us still have energy inefficient light bulbs. Why is that? Why aren't we taking those first steps? And I think, again, I really want to understand how we can make it as simple and easy as possible for smaller businesses in particular. You mentioned local hairdressers, micro businesses, local businesses. How can we make them understand that net zero is something that can save them money, and how can we engage them on that? What's the best language to use? Do we even want to talk about net zero? I'm skipping around here, but there's loads of different topics that we could explore with SMEs to better understand what net zero means for them, and then listen and go forward and help them develop those tools that they will need.
Thank you. So let's talk more about that business case. I think we're getting a bit of action in the chat, and we'll come back to that, because I think Matt's raising some good points there. Is, in your experience, again, out of necessity generalizing, but making the internal case for net zero in a small company, how do you think we can, so first, where there's no dedicated sustainability team, how would you go about demonstrating the value to a company of going net zero? Do you have, I guess, again, now building on Matt's point, going beyond just changing light bulbs and energy reductions, I think you've sort of touched on this, but maybe we could consolidate that. How do we begin to measure the positive impact of taking action on climate change from a business perspective? Liam, do you want to take a stab?
Yeah, okay. So I mean, the first thing to say is, I think I mean, there's dozens of studies out there that have kind of looked at and can demonstrate how sort of changing to more sort of sustainable behaviours helps businesses deliver benefits, whether that be kind of, as Catherine says, just kind of short-term reduction of costs, whether that be kind of wider carbon abatement, or even just kind of the wider PR benefits of organisations kind of demonstrating their commitment to it as well. I think it is a particular challenge for SMEs where they don't necessarily have that kind of dedicated team focused on this one. But I think one of the things for businesses to maybe to consider is thinking about their own supply chains and their own customers and what they're doing as well. So, for instance, say you're a supplier to a large supermarket chain. If they aren't already asking you questions about what you're doing to reduce your kind of influence on climate change, they probably will start to ask you that quite soon, because it will become important for them as a larger business to demonstrate how their supply chains are operating. So I think engaging with your own customers, engaging with your own supply chains will give you a real good feel and understanding for exactly the types of changes and the types of kind of pace that's kind of expected of smaller businesses as well. So I think the big takeaway for me really is, I think action around this is almost going to become a right to operate, because it will become more of an expectation of customers, your suppliers, your investors. So I think that's a really important thing to engage with right now to get that understanding on what you need to do within your own business.
Would you add anything, Catherine?
No, I think that was pretty comprehensive. I'm quite keen to answer Matt's question if we're allowed to jump in.
Absolutely. Let's do that.
Just to say, Matt's raised the good point that it's not just about, surely this isn't just about energy use. Absolutely not. I mean, that's obviously a core part of it, but I suppose looking at simple first steps, reducing your energy use is going to be, one of those easy, quick, simple moves that we want businesses to take. And yes, there are obviously measures that we would want to look at around travel patterns, reducing unnecessary flying especially is something that we would potentially, be looking at, reduce business travel. But I suppose on the flip side, what I don't want to do is sort of restrain businesses unnecessarily. I mean, during this period, businesses are just trying to stay afloat, especially smaller ones. And I don't want to come across, I don't want to start imposing things like that, or to start suggesting measures at this stage that may impede that growth that they're going to need to survive, if that makes sense. So I don't want to come in too hard on travel patterns right now. Recycling is a really good point, but it's nowhere near where we need businesses to go. So I understand, there's a lot of positive work going on there about reducing waste, about recycling. But I suppose that the real challenge for net zero is that that's only a really small first step. That's part of the agenda, but it's not what we need businesses to do if we're seriously looking at helping them reduce their emissions. So I think we need to be really clear. We've talked about not wanting to generalize. We've talked about looking at, various measures that are sector specific. And I think that's really important in engaging smaller businesses. There are going to be huge differences between, again, the local hairdresser, the local manufacturer, etc., and the changes that they will perhaps need to look at. But I think in terms of cross-cutting enablers for net zero, in terms of those really simple first steps, I mean, I would look at energy use, because it's, again, something that's really simple and straightforward and easy to understand. I swap out my light bulbs, that can save me money. That's quite an easy win for me. So I think it's important to make that clear.
Liam, would you add?
No, I think that's a really good answer. I mean, clearly from a Centrica perspective, our focus is very much on energy and energy services. So I think it's absolutely right. Clearly, the carbon agenda cuts across a number of other different facets. But I think, as Catherine says, that there is immediate opportunities, I think, available in terms of kind of energy use within SMEs, which is both kind of accessible now, is, as I say, potentially kind of already financially compelling in terms of the payback and the kind of the return on investment for some of those sort of things. And I think in terms of impact on the business, whether you're seeking kind of a longer term kind of carbon abatement target over a number of years, or whether you're just looking at simply being able to potentially reduce your consumption, reduce the cost of your energy bill, that's all going to contribute. And I think those smaller incremental steps that Catherine's already mentioned, that's the right place to start. And that's absolutely where our focus is for SMEs, is how do we start to engage in with some of those smaller, simpler, lower cost solutions that gets them very much on that kind of pathway towards kind of potentially more sophisticated, more complex interventions down the line.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's key, isn't it? That almost the thin edge of the wedge, we need to get all companies onto that net zero pathway. But to actually get to the end of that journey is often going to require transformative steps and bringing in circular economy principles and reconsidering product lines and fundamental ways of doing business, because some of our traditional ways of doing business are just not compatible with a net zero target. But I think it's not a great, well, I don't know, maybe that's a question around the question of the pandemic. I think it's absolutely right, Catherine, as you said, that many companies are really struggling right now. But in our experience, many are doing okay as well. And the shift to home working has cut some costs or transferred some costs onto workers instead of offices. We saw during the lockdown a massive dip in emissions. Is there a target there? Do you see openings where we can lock in some of those carbon emission reductions into and build back better, as we've been hearing lots of rhetoric about? You sort of suggested, I think, Catherine, that the COVID crisis has been impacting on your approach to SMEs. Is that fair to say, or how would you expand on that?
Yeah, definitely. And just to emphasize that my approach has only just started. So this is part of a lot of research, a lot of conversations that we're going to be having with businesses over the next few months to really, listen and understand what those challenges are. But where potentially there are opportunities, shall we say, for us to sort of, engage with SMEs where they have been able to save money, for example, reducing short business trips, for example. Again, not putting that out there as something that we're formally looking at, but just, something that's clearly come up as you say, people are working from home more. We've been able to have conversations, without having to get on a train or a plane. So perhaps that's something that we can look to engage businesses on once they've sort of fully understood the impact of COVID, because obviously it's still ongoing. We want to make sure that we're engaging in the right way at the right time. But I think absolutely where they have saved money, perhaps, people working, so there's business travel, there's people working from home more and realizing perhaps that their home is draftier than they realized, and perhaps they might want to look at insulation. We've obviously launched the Green Homes Grant that we want everyone to take advantage of. And I think that's really important, again, to make it clear that there are some really simple steps that you can take to reduce emissions, to make your properties more efficient, that cut across business and home working. And that's something, again, that's part of that conversation right now.
Thank you. Let's talk about Jack's question and just generally the support that's available to SMEs. So Jack's point, I think, is a really interesting one. And I'm wondering whether you're building that into your programs, this idea of influencing the influencers. And maybe I know the ICAW are members of our network and are doing a fair bit of work in this space. That's, I think, a really interesting idea to be going after accountants in particular. But is that something that you've looked at?
Yes, if I just jump in ahead of Liam, sorry.
Sure. I thought I was on mute for a minute then.
Do you want to go ahead?
No, after you, Catherine. Can you go first?
Just to say, obviously, we're looking at smaller businesses. We're looking at how best to engage them, and absolutely looking at LEPs, looking at the devolved administrations, and those various sort of local, ways that we can influence SMEs. Yes, absolutely. You've mentioned accountants, lawyers. Yes, all of those. Not quite at the same time, but they are definitely part of the conversations that we want to be having. Professional business services are going to be really important. Tech companies, especially providing services to smaller companies. So yes, we're looking at all of those various influencing factors. yes, we are seeking to influence the influencers, but again, I really want to make sure that we're doing that in the right way at the right time, and that it doesn't come across that we're trying to force businesses to take up expensive new technology, etc. I want to make it clear that that's part of a conversation we're having with them to understand how best to move them forwards on this.
Liam.
Yeah, I am off mute now. Yeah, so completely agree with everything Catherine said there. I mean, as I sort of said before, we've been talking to peers kind of extensively. I guess within Centrica, we've been also kind of actively speaking to a number of other kind of different institutions. So I think kind of some of the banks and the lending institutions have a big part to play here as well that are supporting SMEs. So we are talking to some of the kind of the banks within the UK about how can we start to kind of stimulate investment through them, to potentially lend for kind of green technologies. How does that sort of play into this as well? Because clearly some of the capital constraints that businesses have, that has to be something which can be easily accessed, and potentially there's something there around kind of incentives kind of through some of those lending institutions. The other area that kind of, to be honest, we haven't got an answer to, but it's a problem that I think we need to sort of face into, is if you look at the kind of the building stocks and the premises that a lot of SMEs are within, a lot of them are rented. So I think one of the groups that we will really need to engage with is that kind of commercial landlord market. So where you have a business that isn't necessarily owning the premise, pays the energy bills, but doesn't necessarily have full control over the kind of the infrastructure and the fabric of the building. That kind of engagement with the commercial landlord market is going to be really critical for SMEs as well, because you may have some businesses who move into premises and move out of businesses, but you have a permanent kind of commercial landlord community there who actually can influence and can probably have a big part to play in terms of influencing the efficiency of the building stock, making sure that the kind of the fabric of the building is being upgraded so that whichever business is moving in or moving out, they're moving into a efficient building, a building that's going to operate with some of these things in mind. So again, there's so many different groups, I think, it's kind of that we are going to have to engage with, but certainly the commercial landlord sector is something which we are actively thinking about and actively talking to peers about how we might sort of stimulate engagement with those as well.
And just to say briefly, so we've launched a consultation on tightening the minimum energy efficiency standards for rented non-domestic buildings. That has a proposed trajectory of EPC Band 3, apparently by 2030. So that could potentially save businesses £1 billion a year in energy bills by 2030, which is astonishing. So completely agree that looking at those the energy efficiency of those buildings is a really important first step to looking at how we can save businesses quite a considerable amount of money.
At the risk of going off topic, is there also a domestic buildings plan? Because I think that exactly that same scenario plays out every day with residential tenants who are responsible for the energy bills but aren't eligible to install insulation or solar panels or
well,
so on.
That's what the Green Homes Grant does. So people receiving income supports in various types of income support can receive up to £10,000 to insulate their property. People who aren't on income support can get up to £5,000. So that's open to everyone. It's open now, and we strongly encourage people to sign up for it, because the Green Homes Grant is something, again, that's going to make a huge difference to improving the insulation energy efficiency of private buildings.
That's really interesting, and I note, I won't name names, but I see another one of our attendees is from a company that would probably consider SMEs to be their clients, not unlike your situation, Liam. Do you see other, what would we call it, infrastructure utilities providing support for SMEs to help them on this journey? So we saw recycling mentioned, and of course this is a challenge where some of it comes back to local councils, but equally to the waste collection companies. Do you see a role there for other service providers to SMEs to take on more and provide some of the support, perhaps to help mitigate the cost to SMEs of becoming more sustainable?
Yeah, I think absolutely. So I mean, I've mentioned some of the kind of the lending institutions, some of the banks that we're sort of talking to. I guess given where we are right now, I guess kind of investment in infrastructure improvement can fall down the list of priorities in a lot of businesses. But I think what we are starting to see, as I say, is much greater activity and engagement through whether it be banks, through kind of software companies. There's a number of different kind of sectors that are really starting to sort of take this seriously. One of the things that we've been looking at is, again, going back to my point earlier about how do you give businesses the right level of insight, is we're starting to look at how do we find the right partnerships with other different businesses to support SMEs on this journey. So we've been talking to a number of different kind of software providers who are starting to actively look at engaging and provide solutions into this market as well. So, I mean, one such example of kind of probably those kind of technology companies who are beginning to kind of take this seriously is we're partnering with a UK company called Arbenco, who recently won some funding through a competition that Bays actually ran, called Baysy. And what they're actually doing is they're starting to develop platform specifically for the SME market to help them identify the types of solutions around energy efficiency and net zero that can support their businesses. So I think there is something bubbling under the surface. There is a kind of a growing market, and there are a number of different kind of partners out there who are looking at whether it be technology and insight, whether it be about financing and lending, whether it be about specific hardware and solutions. It's about bringing all of that together into kind of some sort of coherent strategy.
Thank you. Matt has another great question, and Catherine would like to address it. So let's go to that. What about the challenge of just not being asked enough about climate, not being a big enough priority elsewhere?
That's really interesting, because that's not something we find with the bigger companies. So what I find is that net zero is sort of embedded within the other sort of ethical issues, if we can call them that you've mentioned. So you look at, security, modern slavery, diversity, water shortages. There are all sorts of different subjects that I think tend to be bound up in that kind of, sustainability or being a responsible business. And I think these terms are bandied around quite a lot. And I'm not convinced that that's necessarily helpful. I suppose, looking at it in the round, these are all things that if you want to be a sustainable, responsible business, again, using those terms quite interchangeably, that you need to look at, because clearly what's the point in reducing your emissions if you're enslaving people or, treating women badly, for example. These are all things that are really important to businesses, and we want to make sure that obviously that this is beyond my remit, but that they're addressing all of those things in the round. And it's interesting that that's not sort of part of that conversation when you look at smaller businesses. So I suppose the next step on that would be, how do we start that conversation? How do we start talking about net zero? And again, do we start from that? Do we start talking about legislation and what our official UK target is? Or do we frame it more about, this is about making your business better, it's about making it more efficient, saving you money, etc. So I really want to understand from you how we start embedding net zero in these conversations. We're already looking at training and education, and looking at apprenticeships and skills, for example. All of that's really important, I think, to start embedding net zero in sort of everyday business behaviours, in the same way that you would talk about health and safety. How do we normalise net zero as part of that, that package of measures that you want to be looking at as a business to make sure that you're doing everything right? So that's a really, really interesting question, and I'm happy to discuss it further. Again, really keen just to say, I know before we end the session, that if anyone wants to get in touch with me, I would be very, very keen to continue these conversations. I think you've raised some really interesting questions.
We will send round a follow-up email to enable that. You can let us know how you want to pass on your contact details, and we can certainly accommodate that. So this leads me to thinking, we bandy about the term net zero without necessarily defining it too carefully, and it's not something. I mean, there are things where a small company can become accredited as carbon neutral or net zero, or and there are science-based targets, and there's a pathway for small companies to get an official certified science-based target. Do you put much stock in that? And do we need some sort of evidence for small companies that want to start making claims about being net zero? Is it sufficient to just put it out there that we're committed to this,
what would you want to see in terms of evidence?
Shall I?
Sure. Yeah, you go ahead, Liam.
Yeah. So I mean, I think there's reams of evidence out there already. I think that the key thing that what we need to do is the concept of net zero in terms of where we need to get to, I think, is a relatively simple one. I think what is difficult, and probably most difficult for a lot of SMEs, is how do you therefore break this kind of fairly broad, kind of intangible goal down into something that's kind of meaningful for the individual business. So I think one of the things, and again, this is something we've been talking to government about, is if there is going to be intervention in the market, how do we measure this in such a way that it becomes tangible to the business and tangible to this particular community of customers? I think a lot of businesses will want to commit to the idea of net zero, and I think in doing that, it's vital that we then kind of get a meaningful kind of internal target that can then be kind of measured kind of proactively. I think the second thing is then, how do we take that target and break it down into some kind of really, really simple bite-sized chunks for businesses to be able to measure? So whether we talk about energy savings on bills, whether we talk about carbon reduction, we've got to kind of land on what's the right way to measure this. Is it EPC ratings? Is it carbon reduction? Is it kind of bill savings? I think that the other thing I would say, and this is kind of part of actually landing on what the right way to measure this is we've got to give that insight up front. We have to start engaging with businesses around what the opportunity is, because if you don't measure it, you can't control it, I think is the phrase that Catherine coined at the start of the call. So we have to be able to provide some insight that allows businesses to start measuring something. And then from there, you can then start to create those kind of more manageable kind of incremental targets to really focus on what it is that you're trying to achieve within the business.
Did you want to add anything, Catherine?
Yeah, just to say, completely agree with that. Absolutely. I think, businesses would need some sort of action plan on this. Again, simplifying it, making those steps really clear. We'd need that potentially at a sectoral level, which is what I'm looking into. So what would a sector-wide action plan on net zero look like, especially ahead of COP26? I think just my main point around the tools that are available, there are lots of different platforms out there. There are lots of different tools being developed for businesses. And for me personally, that seems a little confusing. And what we don't want to do is make this more complicated, make it harder, make it more confusing. So I think in terms of what we want to promote as a simple first step, we're advocating joining the Race to Zero, which is an umbrella campaign ahead of COP, which encompasses multiple different initiatives, brings them all together, provides a single platform for businesses to sign up. And as part of the Race to Zero UK, there's the SME Climate Hub that's been developed. So again, I think just for sheer simplicity, we would want to encourage businesses to look at that SME Climate Hub, to sign up. I know B Corp's been mentioned to me. Absolutely, B Corp is also really important. But I suppose ahead of COP, we're just really keen to get everyone on sort of the same page, on the same journey. And the way to do that is to make a very simple first step, make a pledge through the Race to Zero, sign up to that, and go forwards from there.
Thank you very much. We've used up all of our time. So I'm going to just be a little bit cheeky and just give you maybe a minute each to just any final words. And you can use that with either your single most important thing that you would recommend SMEs get doing, or any other topic you would like to expound upon. Liam, would you like to go first?
Yeah, okay. So it's a single most important thing. So I think the first thing to say is, if businesses are committed to the idea of net zero, the first thing really to do is to really focus on setting that target. What is the target that you want to aim for? I think once you've got that, there's then an opportunity to then break it down into sort of manageable chunks. Because I think we talk about 2050 and kind of net zero, it feels like a really long time away, and therefore we've got kind of space to maneuver. I think it's important that we start to set targets now, and that businesses start to set their own kind of internal agenda and target around it, so that some of those smaller incremental steps that we talked about earlier can be kind of made. So I think that kind of splits into two things. I think if you haven't set a target, do it, because without that goal to kind of work towards, on a particular time frame that's right for your business, it is something that will drift. It is something that will always be the lower priority versus the normal short-term challenges that a business has. If you have set a target, what I would say is talk to an expert. So, as I say, one of the very first things that you can potentially do is think about an energy audit. Get something organized for your business where, whether it be ourselves in Centrica or other kind of companies and sort of experts that are in the industry, get somebody into your business to really kind of understand how it operates. Get a smart meter installed so that you can start to measure, so you can start to actually get insight around how energy is being used in your business. Because once you start to package up that insight, that expertise, that's when you'll really start to kind of find those kind of tailored, tangible recommendations that will actually make a business to your business specifically. So absolutely, if you've got a target, access the expertise because it is there, and start that kind of conversation around, what does this mean for my business? How do I start to actually make the right choices around whether it be short-term or long-term investments?
Perfect. Thank you, Liam. Catherine.
Thank you. Just to emphasize a point, I think there was the question that we didn't get around to answering, which is how do we tell, how do we sort of, judge is far too strong a word, how do we sort of measure which businesses are signed up for net zero and which ones aren't? Paraphrasing the question, but I think, again, the really important thing for me ahead of COP26 is to make it as simple and as clear as possible. And the way that we can do that, the way that we can understand which businesses are signing up to net zero, which are sort of lagging behind slightly, is through the Race to Zero campaign. So if you've signed up to that, that's, you've stated your intentions, you want to learn more about net zero as a business, and we can understand that. And that's sort of a clear signal that you want to be part of the Race to Zero, that you want to achieve that for your business. And I think that's the single most important thing I would say, is sign up to the Race to Zero and access resources. Again, there are various other, the Race to Zero encompasses various other organizations that have various different tools and platforms, but the single, simple, most important thing to do, I think, is to sign up to the Race to Zero.
Perfect. Thank you. We'll provide links to that in the follow-up email to help everybody make their way there. Nothing left now but to say thanks very much to Liam and Catherine for your contributions. Thanks very much to Matt and Jack for your contributions via the chat box. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you today. I've learned a lot. I hope it's been valuable for all of you. If you want to know more about Global Compact, you know where to find us. And I wish you a great rest of the day. Hope wherever you are, maybe the sun will break through at some point to warm you up. Thanks very much, and I look forward to seeing you again sometime.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Bye-bye.